Quantum processors are extremely complex beasts. We like to state the fact that a quantum processor with 300 quantum bits, from a potential data storage standpoint, it is equivalent to a classical processor with more bits than the number of atoms in the universe.
Wow.
Not the number of planets, the number of atoms. Now, this is a very complex beast because it can contain a lot of information. It means there's something unique about it that is very complex. It is hard to understand it. And so in order to tame this beast, in order to deal with it, we actually need a lot of compute power. So we developed this open acceleration stack that allows companies to integrate the quantum computer with other computing resources like GPUs or FPGAs, TPUs. That's the core idea. And that's something that we've been first to do in the world.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining another episode of the Boardroom Club. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined also by a good friend of mine, Amado Vargas. Amado.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
So today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Dr. Itamar Sivan, co-founder and CEO of Quantum Machines, a company revolutionizing quantum computing by building the control system and orchestration layer that bridges quantum hardware with practical real-world applications. Last year, they raised more than $170 million from well-known investors like Intel Capital, Red Hot Capital, and a bunch of other interesting folks. So, Itamar, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for hosting me.
The pleasure is ours. So, Itamar, I want to start with a very interesting question about one of your previous TED Talks, because you compared our current technological state to sort of like a caveman that's trying to imagine a computer. If we were a caveman at the quantum era, what is one everyday human experience you believe will be completely unrecognizable, let's say 50 years from now?
I would say that the way I think about this analogy is maybe just like a little bit different. Okay, so if I may. So actually the core idea of this analogy is that it is impossible for us to predict how things will look like in 50 years, right? So my point was, if you think about it, like if you would show a caveman a phone or a computer, not a quantum computer, a classical computer, or any technology that we're using today, and you would ask him, hey, dear caveman, can you imagine the world with this machine, this phone, with this phone, right? In 50 years, what is his ability to predict? I mean, nothing, right? For him, it's like, he cannot predict. The amount of progress that we've made was unpredictable, right? It was unpredictable 100 years ago, let alone 2,000 years ago, let alone for cavemen, right? So what I'm saying here is that the distance between the caveman and today might be like conceptually similar to what, basically to the difference between what we are today and how the world will look like when we fully transform quantum into full-fledged useful technology, right? We kind of realize its potential, right? We can never really fully realize any technologies, any computing technology's potential. That always keeps on making progress, right? But the point is that any trial to predict how life will look like at that point is either underestimation, or if you feel like you want to be more ambitious or bullish on what the future is going to look like, then you might end up in some sci-fi type of perspective. But even that will be, in my perspective, an underestimation. So in my opinion, when we fully realize the potential of these machines, or to a very good degree realize the potential of these machines, well, everything is going to look different. So I don't think there is a task that we do today that might look the same. By the way, I actually believe that to a certain degree, that is true for world way beyond AGI, right? But then quantum is even like farther. Someone may say, well, he was just avoiding the question, right? But avoiding the question is the answer, right? It is the point that we shouldn't really answer it because we don't know.
what I'm excited about quantum is specifically cryptography, because assuming quantum really get its full potential, suddenly this whole Bitcoin world that everyone is so bullish about could disappear tomorrow. So it's a whole new world altogether. And today also much of the conversation about quantum is around the qubit numbers, right? Like 5 qubit, 100 qubit. So what do you think actually people outside of the quantum world maybe misunderstood about what actually limits quantum progress? Is it a scale, maybe error correction, orchestration, or something else entirely?
We always try to anchor ourselves to something that's measurable, right? So that is very natural. But it doesn't always mean that this is like the right measure. At the end of the day, we're building computing machines, right? We're building, just like in classical computing, we're building machines that are supposed to deliver to the world computing power, or if you wish, in its kind of 2026 form, intelligence. That's what we're building. Machinery that delivers to the world computing power and intelligence, right? Now, the number of qubits from vision perspective, right, from a practical usability is not really a number that matters. It's as if you would build a new company, right? And you have some idea for, I'm going to do X with LLMs, like half of Silicon Valley now, or maybe 90%. Does anyone there care about the number of transistors they will have to be used? Like, no one cares about that. That's complete like nonsense, right? So we are bound to talk about things that we have that we can measure, right? And so since quantum computing, it's making incredible progress, and I can elaborate, but still commercially, it's not even infancy, it's like pregnancy. So we cannot yet talk about applications really, or like how fast do you run this and that algorithm. We just kind of go for whatever is easily measurable, right? And by the way, like the idea itself is not in its infancy, right? The idea itself exists for many decades, right? So we've been talking about quantum computing for, I don't know how many decades actually. You can ask your favorite LLM later, but many decades, right? But it is now as a commercial industry. Yes, it is in its infancy. We're talking about just a few years' time since it became like a real industry. Thing that as we strive to realize the potential of quantum computers, right, which is hopefully bringing to the world the biggest leap in computing since the invention of the computer. As we strive to do that, we will have hopefully measures that are more holistic about the system, because the system itself includes, of course, the qubits, so the QPU, but also the PPU, which is what quantum machines develops within the orchestration layer, and then all the GPUs or TPUs or whatever else you use, to run your AI, which is also going to be part of this party, right? So then we're going to find measures that are normal, right? Not counting transistors, right? Talk
Yeah,
about
no,
applications.
absolutely. And all the platform that quantum machine actually built and orchestrates is used by quantum labs all over the world. So I want maybe to touch a little bit about what the platform is all about, and if you can share with us, let's say in everyday language, and also what surprised you the most when you observe how researchers all over the world, they use your platform.
In simple terms, I think that sometimes it's getting a little bit more. Any explanation is going to be a little bit too technical for the broad audience because of the stage of where we are with quantum. And I think that really kind of the thing to understand is about what quantum is about. So quantum is a significant milestone in our journey of developing further and further compute and intelligence with humankind, right? So now, if you break down the quantum computer layers or the quantum computer stack into multiple layers, there are two very fundamental layers. The first being the quantum processor. And this is kind of where all the magic is going to happen, right? This is the QPU, where we have the qubits, which can be in the superpositions and entangled state, and all of these things that maybe some of you are familiar with. And basically, you can think about this layer or this QPU as a muscle, right? You can think of it as an extremely strong muscle, is the strongest muscle on Earth in terms of computing. But just like a muscle needs the brain to operate it, the QPU also does, right? And this is where the PPU kind of comes into play, because what the PPU does is it orchestrates the algorithms on the QPU. And this is what our business is about, right? So it's about plugging into these QPUs that have this incredible potential and then helping orchestrate the algorithms on them. And one of the beautiful things about it is that this layer, this so-called brain or the PPU, is actually applicable for a diversity of QPUs, right? And that is something that we could not predict before starting the company, and we've been shocked at how general this technology is. And this has been a major aspect of our business, of working with different type of QPUs with our customers. And so when you ask what is maybe a surprise to me about what our customers do with our systems, I think that above all, what has been the biggest surprise to me or to us as a company is the incredible pace of progress that our customers do. I would say that in general, the quantum industry, the quantum ecosystem has been very rapid. Some of our early investors, or early potential investors, they were like, yeah, of course, but your timelines this ecosystem's timeline is going to be 3 or 5x, right? Everything is going to slide away into decades away, right? But the fact is that did not happen. Actually, the progress is roughly as we wanted it to be. We're making very good progress as a community. But in particular, I think that what we found is that one of the most differentiating aspects of our technology is that it allows our customers in particular to move faster than others. Then that is a very critical aspect, because when you look at technology and technology in the computing kind of environment, okay, if you have the potential to unlock incredible computing power, well, we're going to get there, right? Whether you like it or not, by hook or by crook, because that's what humanity wants more than anything else, computing power and intelligence. And then it's just a question of, can I get there faster? And can I get there faster than my competitor? Whether my competitor is another lab or another company or another country, right? So that's kind of what this race is all about. This is just one big race. I think that we should consider quantum as the most important technological race of our generation. And then if you look at a race, the most important thing is probably like how fast you go.
I agree, and definitely with your latest funding round, it was a big vote of confidence from all the investors. I think one of the biggest funding round ever for any quantum-related company out there. And Itamar, I want now to touch also about one of your recent product release of the OPX 1000, which means for all the audience that quantum machines is moving toward the kilo-qubit era. But beyond simply adding more connections to the machines, what is the most significant classical to quantum processing challenge that emerged when system approach the 1000th qubit milestone?
There are so many challenges, right? So when we look at the whole stack of technology, there's so many challenges across the board. And when we look at the specific layer that we're operating at, one of the biggest challenges is actually around latency. So the ability to perform significant computation at a very low latency. And why do we need such low latency? The low latency is needed fundamentally because quantum devices, they lose their data very fast. So if you want to operate them, you want to keep up at their pace, you want to correct their errors and so on, you have to be faster, right? So we're always striving to operate very, very fast. Now, operating fast is one thing, let's say for a system of scale X, right? But if you want to be as fast for now while going 10X in size, well, that's much harder. So the development of the system so that it can keep up with the computing power that is needed to run at low latencies, that's hard. And we're talking about latencies which we measure typically at the nanosecond levels and even across very big clusters of basically systems. So that's one thing. The other thing which is very important is we have to develop very high quality electronics because the quantum processors are so fragile. And we're sending basically pulses to them, electromagnetic pulses to them, which are embedding the algorithms, right? And if these pulses are not high quality, the signal is not super pure and clean, then actually we will be introducing errors. Instead of correcting errors, we'll be introducing errors. And so what are we good for, right? So actually, there is kind of two very significant domains here. One is maybe that's more for the technical audience here. So the digital domain of the development of more advanced processors that can run at scale, do heavy lifting of computing. But then there's the analog electronics, the analog development for the very clean signals. Both of them are extremely challenging, extremely challenging. The other aspect that we've been focusing on recently is how do we integrate that into even bigger compute power. Then recently we've made the launch of the open acceleration stack because the concept here is that quantum processors are extremely complex beasts. We like to state the fact that a quantum processor with 300 quantum bits, from a potential data storage standpoint, it is equivalent to a classical processor with more bits than the number of atoms in the universe.
Wow.
Not the number of planets, the number of atoms. Okay. Now, this is a very complex beast because it can contain a lot of information. It means there's something unique about it that is very complex. It is hard to understand it, but it is reality. And so, in order to tame this beast, in order to deal with it, we actually need a lot of compute power. So, we developed this open acceleration stack that allows companies to basically integrate the quantum computer with other computing resources like GPUs or FPGAs, TPUs, and so on and so forth. That's the core idea, and that's something that we've been first to do in the world, and we find that the community is very excited about it.
It seems like phenomenal news, to say the least. I'm definitely looking to this Q day where suddenly it's going to be all new world altogether from different industry that could be revolutionized by it. And you mentioned GPUs, so of course I have to ask you about the DGX quantum collaboration with NVIDIA. Very exciting news, a cornerstone for the quantum space and for quantum machines specifically. But do you see quantum machines becoming the bridge between the GPU and the quantum processors?
This is exactly what it is. This is the bridge. This is the bridge between these two kind of, I don't know if you can see my hands, between these two sides of the world, the quantum and the classical. This is exactly what it is. And basically, the way to think about it is that the open acceleration stack is the extension of that. So it's like the generalization of that. So first there was the DGX Quantum, and then we extended that to be a broad, a general technology that can plug in not just a specific processor with a specific QPU, but something that can host any processor into this machinery.
It's great. And do you think that QPU gonna be sort of like the next GPU in the next decade, or we are still a little bit far from seeing it in practice?
I think that it depends what you kind of mean by the next GPU. The QPUs are going to have a very significant role in unlocking one of the biggest leaps in computing and the development of intelligence, artificial intelligence, right? This is what I think. Now, it will not replace GPUs. The GPUs have a very specific role, which is today is taking mostly the form of whether it's generally AI or embedding LLMs. And I don't think that we're talking about the replacement. I think that both of them are going to have a very significant role in, again, developing further and further and further the scale of computing power that we have access to. If you think about it, computing power is the only resource that humanity truly cannot get enough of. If you look at any resource in the world, the economic understanding is that if I flood the world with supply, then prices will go down to zero, right? If I take the sun scale of energy and provide it to humanity, then the next day energy will be worth nothing, right? It will be cheap. It's cheap as sand, right? Or even less. But there is one thing that will not react in this way, and that is computing in intelligence. My claim is that if we flood the world with compute power, access to compute power, very quickly after, maybe instantaneously, prices will go down, right? That's natural. But very quickly after, this will generate such progress that will almost immediately, we will want more. And this is a very distinct observation of this very specific resource. Then we can look at the spectrum between things that are really have a hard bound, like food. If I provide infinite amount of food to the world of any kind, then we have nothing to do with it. Actually, it's going to cost us to just like get rid of it. Energy, actually, if I go back, I could claim that maybe in 10 or 20 years, humanity will find something to do with all this energy and will want more. But computing is moving very fast because it is generating fast progress by itself. So I would claim that very quickly after, we'll just want more. If you think about it in this context, Moore's law, which predicted that the classical processors will double every 18 months, which is no longer the case, strictly speaking, as it used to be analyzed, was just a manifestation of this law that I'm presenting to you now, right? And it is something that is, I would claim, very fundamental to humanity, because even if you look at our evolutionary progress, actually intelligence is the most important thing that we have gained, right? And so this is something that is distinguishing us from all other animals on this planet. And we cannot get enough of. I think it is something fundamental beyond even technological or economical observation.
I thought that was a fantastic point, Itamar, that yes, the more speed and the greater power of computation, the more demand will go up. So demand will go up with supply because we won't want slower processing times, slower loading times, and less information. We only want more because our whole quality of life will increase. So as quality of life will increase, overall quality will grow in demand. So I think it's an excellent insight you made. So Itamar, you're going more into the pragmatic side of things. I know when Yossi asked you early on about where do you see things 50 years from now, and your answer was, we really can't have an answer because so many things are going to happen. But obviously, when speaking to investors, as a CEO who has raised over $170 million, how do you communicate return on investment to investors when general purpose quantum advantage is still evolving? And how do you think about valuing progress through milestones rather than immediate revenue?
That's an excellent question. I have two answers to that, or an answer in two layers. So first of all, let's just be clear. Since we developed the systems that are needed to operate quantum processors, we already have a business today. Because anyone who wants to develop a quantum processor or even start playing with it would need our system, right? So as opposed to what one may think about the overall industry, which is still in its infancy of commercialization to end users, we as a company, we already are fully commercial with significant revenues. I would say that for a company our stage, we have very significant revenues, very significant growth, and not typical for a deep tech company. Some people call us a deep tech company. I'm not a big fan of this term, but whatever. And definitely not for quantum, right? So that's the first thing I tell investors, obviously, and I don't need to say it, they have the numbers. So that's one. The other is that still the question is good. Why? Because it is true that we're here to unlock something. And the real potential and the real big revenues, even bigger, will come when quantum really kicks in. Then this is a matter of what you really had in mind, right? So when really kicks in. And then my answer, it's about first principles, which is what I was talking about the whole time until now, right? If we're on a journey, humanity is on a journey to unlocking more and more and more computing power. That's what we are. You look at the tech industry, you look at Silicon Valley, that's what it is all about. And if we have now the potential to bring a resource that might, in this journey, to bring the biggest leap the biggest leap. Well, that's worth a lot. Any trial to quantify this is probably, again, being underestimation. I always feel free to avoid questions, and I do it bluntly. Some people ask me, so what's going to be the killer app? I tell them, I think it isn't a good question. It isn't a good question because it's just like having asked, what is going to be the killer app of the computer? You could have asked that Alan Turing when he invented the computer. Having asked, what is going to be the killer app of LLMs? What is not going to be an app or used by LLMs, right? So I think quantum is going to be the same, where it's going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be used everywhere. If you're going to bring to the world a massive computing resource, well, everyone, every industry, every company is going to be using it, and every person, right? Using computing as an individual does not mean you hold the computer in your house, right? You don't have a data center at your house, but you're using data centers every day. Because the technology, even whatever is, you're opening a social network app. Well, there's a lot of many data centers behind the scenes that have been optimized to give you the service that's getting you addicted there.
I actually love the fact that you stick to your guns and you say, hey, I can't give an answer. So that actually shows that you believe in what you're doing. And obviously the investors believe in what you're doing. So somewhat going against what you just talked about, one more question going into the future, looking at cloud computing and obviously where quantum computing will be going for the everyday enthusiast. Looking far ahead, do you envision a future where individuals might own some form of quantum computer at home because everyone wants speed? Or will quantum computing primarily remain a cloud-based resource accessed remotely?
The way I imagine it is that mostly this will be similar to the form of using big compute today, right? Just like, as I just mentioned, you too, Yossi and Amado, you're using, a data centers every day without knowing it, without them being in your living room or your basement, right? And you will be using quantum computers equally, right? Or not equally, but as well. Now, will there be quantum computers at the edge, like we have AI at the edge? Well, today it sounds unlikely, but never say never.
Absolutely. And that makes perfect sense when you talked about it. And I actually feel that the most interesting part of your discussion, especially with Yossi, was when you talked about how, from an evolutionary standpoint, really it's intellect is the main area that always scales and we never get enough of it. I actually remember reading recently that an AI author, he talked about how the competition really isn't about dollars, euros, or pesos. It's really about information resources. So who is information rich? And so I think what you're talking about really connects with that. Going more into your own journey as an entrepreneur, personally, what advice would you give entrepreneurs who want to build companies at the frontier of deep technology?
Obviously, there are many advice. Maybe from the top of my head, one advice is don't listen too much to advice, if that makes sense. It will raise a paradox, of course. But I think that it is kind of a little bit of, it has a point. One of our values at Quantum Machines is to strive to do what others consider as impossible, right? So this is kind of one of our core values, one of 5 core values. And I think that this is a very, very important lesson or important value, important thing for companies, for individuals, but definitely for entrepreneurs, because you're going to meet a lot of people that will tell you, been there, done that, that is impossible. Because who needs advice? I mean, first-time entrepreneurs, right? Or younger entrepreneurs. So then they're going to meet many executives and many experienced people. No, I've been doing this for 30 years. No, that's how you do it. This is impossible. And so I would say, yes, partner with experienced people. That is very important, and know your limits, know what you don't know, and so on. But with a grain of salt, right? Because people always try to seek what the impossible is and try to limit themselves. And some people are risk averse and so on. So I would say that take anything you hear with a grain of salt and try to define by yourself what impossible really is, or what the limit between possible and impossible really is. I always tell people it's a gray area. What is impossible or possible? This is like very subjective. Something that today seems impossible, if you do it right, maybe it is possible. Go with your gut feeling about that.
I think that's fantastic advice. And you're right. I do think that a lot of times I know, especially over here in America, people want to go after the impossible dream, the very whatever they think is Hollywood worthy, if you would. And I also think it's really good to maintain that balance, having the right people around you that will keep you grounded, but also challenge you. So speaking of that, you talked about taking advice with a grain of salt, but in terms of people whose advice you take for everything, was there an influential mentor along your journey? And if so, what was their advice to you?
It's a great question. I'm trying to be modest and listen to advice and know what I don't know, right? And I try to hire people that have experience that I don't. And I have no problem with that, right? Admitting that there are many things I don't know and many things I don't master. However, I don't think I have a specific mentor that or anyone specific that have been super influential for my journey. I try to pick as much as I can from many people. So I think I have many, many people who inspired me, or sometimes maybe I picked a little advice, which became a big impact. But I'm not sure necessarily that I had someone who was clearly like a mentor for me. Obviously, there are books, but I can't consider those who write the books I read as my mentors. I don't even know them. But definitely, I can say, if that's kind of relevant for this context, that there are at least a couple of writers that I've been devoting a lot of my time to listening and re-listening to their books. One of them is definitely Ben Horowitz with a couple of great books, and the others are Leif Babin and Jocko Willink. Very, very inspirational people. So if I had to go for some virtual mentors, then maybe these three.
That's certainly a big three. But I think your first answer makes the most sense. I actually remember reading Udi Levine, the founder of Waze. He actually said that the best founders and CEOs always hire people who have strengths that they don't have. And essentially the ones that don't last are the ones that tend to avoid that. So I think actually that first half of your statement also is gold. My last question to you, on more of a personal note, before pitting back to Yossi, if you were not leading and scaling advanced technology platforms today, what career path do you think you would have pursued in an alternate universe?
I started my journey with the direction of being a researcher. Like, so I did my PhD in quantum electronics, thinking that I'm going to become a researcher, right? An academic. I had deep passion for basic science. But at some point, I got really excited about trying to build things and making impact. For me, a startup is like magic. One day you have nothing, an idea, and a year later you have, I don't know, X number of people generating Y millions of dollars in revenue out of Z customers and impacting, I don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands or whatever number of people. So that is like magic. From nothing, you generate quite a lot. So I think that impact is definitely something that's at the core of my motivation. I think that I could see it as a plausible alternate universe where I would go for politics, trying to make impact over there. Politics tends to be dirty, so maybe I would not keep for long, but easier said than done. But I don't have to do it now, so I can say it.
Good choice. My original background was politics before going to business school, and I do plan on going back. And I think you have what it takes. So it's like it's more about what you have up here and inside here at the end of the day. And actually, one short question that tends to be a favorite for our viewers. You brought up being a reader. I'm also a reader. But outside of that, is there a favorite television series or movie that you like?
Yeah, I admit I don't have much time for for TV anymore. Maybe that's another advice for entrepreneurs. Get used to maybe not having too many hobbies. Uh, but yeah, I would say that I'm definitely a big Star Wars fan. So have watched the movies not once. I will not say how many times. So definitely I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Perfect. Well, also Star Wars is a great choice. I think probably 80% of the world likes Star Wars. Maybe 70. But moving forward, thank you very much for the answers, and pitting back to Yossi.
So, Itamar, it's been really a joy. I do have one last question that actually we asked recently many of our guests. If you think about the idea of data centers in space, how meaningful it could be for advancements in quantum computing. Do you think it's going to be a game changer for the development or not necessarily? Assuming it works.
I think that we have many bottlenecks to solve before those which will be solved by sending our quantum computers to outer space. But with some of the realizations of quantum computers that are still possible, because we don't know yet how quantum computers are going to look like in 10 years. So there are many options, but for some of them, I estimate that it might be impactful.
It seems like exciting future for all of us. So Itamar, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been a pleasure to hosting you. A super interesting and honest conversation. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other very interesting episodes to show you from the president of Cisco, president of ServiceNow. So stay tuned. And Itamar, may the force be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.